Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the Black Swan Podcast. Quick context, Black Swan Productions is a production company in Cardiff that produces branded content and original content. And we've created this podcast with the hopes of providing high-quality educational resources and building an ambitious community. In this episode, we're interviewing the fantastic Alex Murphy, the former marketing director for the FTSE 100 company Admiral, and currently the co-founder of Balance, the financial services digital marketing agency. I met Alex when he was giving a talk at a CIM event in Cardiff a couple years ago, and I was blown away by his marketing knowledge. So now, I'm looking to ask him some questions and learn more about his way of handling marketing and brand growth. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and feel free to skip to any section that interests you the most, using the timecodes below. So, can you introduce who you are and where you work?
Yes, I'm Alex Murphy. I've got a couple of jobs. So my main job where I spend most of my time is with Balance, which is a digital marketing agency for financial services. And then my other job is I'm a consultant, or fractional, as they call it these days, CMO for different companies.
Okay, what sectors do you tend to work in?
So within Balance, we're purely financial services. So
Okay.
that would be banks, insurers, building sites, you could list them all day. It's one of those niches that's not really a niche because there's so many different companies. And then consultancy, CMO, could be everything. I've worked with engineers, beverages companies, castles, whatever, you name it.
So can you explain sort of your journey and how it led you into that sector?
So I didn't choose to be primarily working in financial services. It's just the jobs that come up. I mean, with South Wales is actually quite a big financial services presence. So you tend to go and you get a bit pigeonholed.
Yeah.
Which is why I did the consultancy thing so I could get more experience. But sort of the first relevant job in financial services was the Royal Mint. I don't want to do that, this is your life thing. Yeah. But I did worked in the Royal Mint. From there, I worked in Go Compare for a couple of years, which is, fascinating business. And then from Go Compare, leapt over the other side of the fence to work in Admiral, and I was there for 5 years before doing what I do now.
That's great. So what are your core values, and do they guide your work? Do they influence your marketing, your approach to leadership?
I don't think it's funny because I do this with companies and we do the values thing, and I don't really know what mine are. I'd like to say I have a really clear idea. I don't. I suppose I learned quite a long time ago because I worked for a company called Source in Penarth. Yeah. And I think I was in my late 20s. And a lot of senior people had been quite tough, not particularly nice to their teams. And then when I worked in Source, we were in this guy, the MD Mick, and he was just a nice guy. Yeah. And really well respected, and they did really, really well. And it was kind of, I learned where you could be responsible and have big teams and be really successful without being a dick. Yeah. and so I thought, well, that's good because I don't really want to be. Sure. But I like to work hard, but mostly because I like my job. Sure. But also I like going out with the team and having a drink and all those things as well. So, and I wasn't the person who came up with this, but it was almost like work hard, play hard, and don't be a dick. Yeah. They're kind of my only three values really with work, and that's done me all right. Yeah, sure. So can you talk a little bit about your experience? I mean, you were a marketing director for Admiral. What led you to be in such a high role, such a big business? I think they didn't know what they were doing when they were hiring. They made a mistake somewhere and I got into the wrong pile. I don't know, I was quite lucky to ride the wave with digital marketing. Yeah. So I'm in my early 40s now. So I did marketing degree, and then I got a 2.2, so not that great grade, and then I went into whatever jobs became available, and one happened to be a website developer in Swansea. So I had a bit of the web background. Then jobs started coming up that were web and marketing together, so the digital marketing thing. I was just right time, right place, I think, and I was really interested in both. I've always been fascinated by marketing, and I've been a bit of a geek, so I like digital stuff, and so I was just lucky I had the right skills as that wave of digital was coming up. Yeah. Rode that wave, and I don't know, had some kind of aptitude for it, and so just went from there, really. And then the relevancy of having the experience of the market and understanding financial services to a deeper and deeper degree. Yeah. Don't ask me how to finer details of loss ratios and insurance work, but I probably know more than most despite everything. So that's why I ended up in that role.
Okay.
And I was there for 5 years. So
nice. So what is your proudest career moment so far?
So I really liked working on a campaign that we did. So like everyone, we were all deeply affected by COVID. And I hate that COVID probably comes up as a big thing, and especially if you have people from the NHS on these things. I don't really have much to compare to that. But when we, as you probably know, within Admiral being a car insurer, and then no one was allowed to drive, basically, or no one really went anywhere. So you're talking almost early February, March 2020, when we realised that we were going to get locked down. And but people were still paying the car insurance, which is it's a grudge purchase anyway. Yeah. Right. So then they've always got pressures. There's people gone into furlough. So we noticed quite early on we were going to have to do something to help at least slightly ease that burden that we would contribute to, especially as the way insurers work. If no one claims, you get lots of money coming in, but no money going out. So there was a moral requirement as well. But it's also immensely complicated and immensely risky because no one knew when we were going to be back on the roads. Yeah. So if you changed all the pricing and then suddenly everyone's on the roads, insurance companies, despite people thinking they're like fat cats rolling money, actually they make very, very thin margins at the top. A lot of them go year to year without making any money, despite what the governments tend to think. So it's a really fine balance. So there was huge amounts of work. We spent a lot of time looking in America, and Geico and all those massive companies, because they went first and they were doing a lot of big things, and a lot of them were falling really badly and being taken by the public very badly because they were like, oh, get some Geico bucks. And so they're going, no, you're just ripping me off at the worst possible time. So we had a brand positioning, which was rewardingly simple at the time. And we thought, well, we had 12 different options. And bearing in mind all this, we were all gone home and we were trying to make our computers work, and Teams is new, and we worked, I think my team worked something like 6 weeks straight. Like every day we were on, like including weekends, because we had so much to do to get customers able to claim and all those things and communicate with everyone. And we had 12 options, something like that. And the one that we narrowed down to was rewarding. So everyone got 25 quid and simple. You didn't have to do anything, you all got it. But the reason I'm proud of it is because it was so, like everyone got the same amount of money. Yeah. So actually, we thought, well, should we do a percentage based? But actually, that means that a guy who's driving some giant, so it's a Porsche or something ridiculously expensive to insure, he actually got more money back than some mum who's trying to work out what's going on and she's got a little Fiesta and probably doesn't pay much in insurance. She'd get like 7 quid, that would mean, and he'd get 50 odd quid, and he doesn't need the 50 quid, and she really needs the money. So there was a lot of, for such a large corporate, there was a huge moral approach to how we did everything. And I don't mean marketing, I mean the company, because marketing is almost just the mouthpiece of the company, right? Yeah. So I was proud of that. And then from a marketing perspective, it did really well. We were YouGov called it the best campaign over COVID. Wow. Beat Domino's, beat everyone. Yeah. So it was, it was technically the best piece of work that we did, and it was also a huge amount of work. But also, it was personally, it was something we were all really proud of to be a part of.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So how do you ensure a financial services brand has a distinctive voice?
I'm glad you said distinctive there, because everyone goes, oh, how are they differentiated? And they're not.
Sure. And
there's a whole thing, and Mark Ritson talks about, Professor Mark Ritson talks about differentiation versus distinction. It's like all positioning, I suppose. It's got to be true to you. Yeah. So I'm not saying like a cartoon dog is true to what Admiral is, but I think distinction is you work out you do all the positioning and you work out what actually is true to this positioning. What works? Are we friendly and all this and what is out there already? So how do you stand out from it? Again, distinctively rather than differentiated, and then you've just got to keep hammering it. You've got to have consistency. Sure. So once you've worked out distinction is as simple as knowing what's out there, fully understanding it, fully understanding how people perceive it, and then being different from that. And you can do all sorts of exercises like market mapping, competitor mapping, and all that jazz. But what people do is they try something and they go, oh, well, it's not really taken yet, or all the brand metrics have dipped. Well, they will dip. Any change causes a dip. but then you stick with it and then it builds up over time. So distinction is knowing who you are, knowing who everyone else is, knowing how people perceive the market, your customers perceive you and the alternatives, and then sticking to it consistently.
So what steps do you take to evolve that brand's identity while staying true to its core values with the changing times?
I think you have to know what those values are. I mean, and it's ironic because I don't know what mine are. But there's loads of stuff, and it's not popular anymore. So Simon Sinek talks about the golden circles, and everyone's kind of poo-poos Simon Sinek now.
Yeah.
And I think they missed the point.
Sure.
They talk about it's based on outdated neuroscience that doesn't actually been disproven. Forget all that. What the whole exercise is getting everyone in a room, and I do these positioning workshops with customers, with clients, or whatever, and just getting 6 people from the board to agree on what the business is.
Right.
All right, and align on that. That's the most. It doesn't matter what the output is really. Aligning the top brass on what the company is and what it's trying to achieve.
Sure.
Is once you can do that and everyone agrees and they genuinely agree, not concede. Everyone agrees, and you've got that aligned, and you've got that down and codified. Everything comes off that.
Yeah.
And then once you know what your values are, that's how you stay true to your values, because you're still the same business. It doesn't matter if you're going into insurance or mortgages or whatever it might be. You're still the same core business. You're still going to treat customers the same way. You're still going to approach things the same way. So it's not so hard then. When it's really hard is when a business doesn't have that, know what that core is.
Sure.
And everything they do pulls them into a different shape. And then the customers don't know who they are.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense. So can you give us an example of an emotive campaign that really landed, and why it's important to produce content that builds trust and connects on a human level?
It's hard to pick emotive campaigns in insurance and financial services.
Sure.
And not because it's boring. I don't think, there's lots of different emotions, right? There's humor and all sorts,
Yeah.
And it's not just, emotionally like heart-rending kind of thing. It's not really meant. You don't get a lot of that in financial services.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. It's that you don't want to fear, you don't want to fearmonger with people,
Right.
and you don't want to feel people to feel pressured into buying, particularly financial services. There's exactly rules about it, right?
Right. Sure.
So you tend to avoid the, oh well, you better get life insurance because it's not very nice way to approach it. So generally, even more emotive campaigns in that level, generally, the Dove campaigns are amazing.
Yeah.
And everyone, it's almost a shame that everyone trots at the same examples because it shows it might be not enough out there.
Yeah.
But the Dove campaigns are, and the more, as a parent, I've got 2 daughters, I see those campaigns and I'm feeling, oh my gosh, that is actually really scary, but also that I want my daughters to grow up in a world that's sort of influenced by those campaigns.
So what do you think those campaigns do right?
What are they right? I think they're brave.
Yeah.
I think they could alienate people with some of the
Sure.
campaigns, and they're not. They know what they stand for. They know what they're trying to be. They could conform to the stereotypes and maybe make adverts that I don't know. The people who only value a certain aesthetic,
Sure.
they would go. They don't buy into it, and that's a shame that people are
Yeah.
like that. But I think that you have to be brave because you have to basically turn around. At some point long ago, someone turned around and went, this is who we are, we're going to stick to it. And that means that some people who don't appreciate that aesthetic are not going to like it, and we're going to turn them away. But that's okay.
Yeah.
And then they created a category and they created a sentiment. So I think being true to themselves is what they get. And then understanding the challenges of today and being quite on it. They're very good about social media and the risks of social media. They know the challenges are coming. And they must be reading into this as well. They must be looking at the proper studies about it. And it's, because you can't go out and say stuff like this unless you've got some good scientific basis for it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of thought and a lot of care that goes into these things. And it shows.
Yeah, for sure. So how do you measure and improve customer loyalty in a sector where trust is paramount?
See, that's my trigger word. I hate the word loyalty.
Right, sure.
I hate it.
Why?
People who work with me know I hate this word. So, because people aren't dogs to be trained. Loyalty is such a terrible word, and I think it's said not with terrible sentiment.
No, sure.
But I've worked in companies that have loyalty departments, and they're good people, and they're not they don't.
Do you think they're just using the wrong word?
The problem is, even I try and think of a better shortcut, because I have a rant about it in the office. I go, oh, bloody loyalty, they're not dogs, you know. And people have heard me say that before. But then they go, oh, should we call it instead? And I go, customer return preference. Yeah. They go, yeah, that's snappy.
Sure.
Loyalty's a myth. Right. Okay, people aren't loyal to a brand. They repeat purchase in a brand because they prefer it over going somewhere else. It's not very fun or sexy. It is what it is, right? Yeah. People repeat purchase because they have a slight preference, and it's harder to change than it is not to change. You know, it's no more loyalty than it is lethargy. You know, it's just. But so in terms of that, though, in terms of how do you maintain that preference? Yeah. That's a different thing. It's still very important. Having return purchase is extremely important. Yeah. I mean, it was overblown that your core customers are your most important. And everyone used to go about this stat going, oh, it's 5 times more expensive to bring in a new customer than it is. And it might be, but then if you don't focus on new customers, you never grow. Yeah. And you end up and all it takes is, because this loyalty is fickle. Sure. If you just focus on milking one core set of customers, it doesn't take long for someone to turn up with a slightly marginally better proposition and sweep them all away. Sure. Because people are fickle. There's loads of work on that. So how do you do it? Existing customers are interesting because you've got a lot more opportunity. So you make big promises, big flashy promises with your marketing, but then you've got to fulfill them. And there's two. So some of it's obvious, right? We will give you a 100% guarantee. Our product is good. Our product won't break. That's pretty straightforward stuff to fulfill. Yeah. But if, for example, you say, use our simple process, and actually you have a terribly complex process, you know, or we reward you for doing this, and then you don't actually have a reward system, then that brand promise tends to fall away. Right. And if that brand promise falls away, then the thing that was buying you preference at the first purchase has gone. So it's easy to take a customer away. I mean, I'm from car insurance, where the loyalty is basically zero. Right? Yeah. I mean, there's data, Google did data on it, and it was, I think 92% of people would switch for a slightly better proposition. I mean, that's a nightmare. Yeah. It's only products that are much stickier and much more complicated to move people away from. Life insurance, for example, or and it's terrible to use this example outside of financial services, Apple, right? Sure. You have the Apple fanboys. Yeah. But they're actually the real fanboys. They're like the people who have an apple tattooed on their thigh. Yeah. You know, they're relatively rare.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Oh, I'm sure it exists. It absolutely must exist somewhere. But most of the time, loyalty is a system that's built in, an ecosystem that's built of, I've forgotten the word now, but when you basically can't move away. Right, sure. I can't think of the word. But Apple builds its ecosystem, right? So your watch plugs into your phone, plugs into your computer. That's almost like a systematic, mechanistic form of loyalty. Right. Where it's, and you know, insurance companies do it, right? Where if you buy multiple products, you get so many discounts that it's almost hard to move away, because if you do, everything comes up in price. It's mechanistic, really, rather than emotional. Yeah. I wish I could remember the word. But Apple's products, I mean, my Apple Watch is actually slightly worse than my Garmin. Yeah. And I'm still not used to using a MacBook over my Windows machine. Yeah. But together it all syncs. So you build loyalty that way. Either build an ecosystem or at least be consistent with your promises.
Sure. So what are the biggest challenges financial services companies face in brand building, and how would you typically overcome them?
So this is how we came about the concept of balance in the first place. So there's few things that are more dangerous than two blokes who have come up with the same idea independently and come together and have that idea, which is a financial services specialist agency, because there aren't really that many that exist. There's a couple of design ones, but not really any performance marketing, certainly. Yeah. So though we both came to the idea and we both talked it through extensively, I said, well, I'd like to test this. Are there consistent problems of financial services marketing people get? It's also a mouthful saying FS marketing, but and so we looked at it, and there seemed to be sort of three things, and I interviewed lots of marketing directors and heads of marketing in FS, and they tend to be three things, and there's 3 R's. But it wasn't 3 R's, but it's easy for me to remember, so I made them 3 R's, which is So the main thing is, first one is resources. In FS, there tends to be a lot less smaller teams for the relative size. So somewhere like, and I know I keep referring back to it because it's the example I know the best, but someone like Admiral makes over 2 billion a year, right? Now, if an FMCG company or a fashion company made 2 billion a year, its marketing team would be about 200 people.
Sure.
Admiral's is around 50.
Right.
You know, and is considered one of the biggest marketing departments in Wales, particularly in an FS is a big one.
Yeah.
So resource is always under the cosh within FS. And you talk about building a brand. You've got so many activities you could do, but only so many people to do it.
Right.
Then there's ROI. Now ROI is a challenge for every financial services institution, but the challenge that comes in within this particular sector is they also have these big strategic goals. Yeah. So they have these big long-term strategic goals, and a lot of the business will be capital expenditure, a lot of it's stuff, although there's changes to rules, which means that maybe marketing can do that. But all of these things are fighting against this short-term ratios that they have to achieve.
Yeah.
So there's a big challenge there about measurement and data, and it's intensely data-centric. And then the final thing, obviously, is regulation. So regulation is the big part that every financial services company has to come up against, or most of them do. And what that does is one of two things. You either get agencies rock up and they come up with ideas that are so ridiculous to build a brand that you could never use them lest you end up in prison. And that's a real possible consequence for people in financial services. Right, sure. You have different levels of responsibility, which means if you did put an ad out that was that bad, you could end up.
Wow.
Yeah. So
has that ever happened?
I don't think
okay.
so, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, sure.
Didn't happen to me. That wasn't but then you get the other end, where agencies don't understand the regulation enough, and so they just to play safe, and
sure.
and just like and you basically go, let's just not do anything risky at all, and the world is bereft with financial service ads that are the most tedious things in the world. Yeah, and I don't mean it's not just in the creative execution, really boring insurance ads or really boring financial services ads or investment ads. It's also in the digital execution, the performance. Yeah. They don't do things with data because they're worried about they don't understand how they can use the data in a fair and transparent way. So they don't use data at all. So they do, again, blanket ads. Or again, the opposite is possible, where they use data in a way that's completely irresponsible, and right, you can't do that. So treading that balance, hence the name, is part of what we came with. So building a brand within financial services is so hard because you're basically navigating these three things all the time,
right?
Without diluting it.
Yeah. And
then you talked about distinctiveness in the earlier question. It's actually, that's what makes it so hard to do that, because everyone's so scared to step a foot out that's why everything merges into one.
Right, sure.
When I was in Go Compare, and then actually compare them, price comparison are a little bit more out there than most.
Sure.
But when I was in Go Compare, the most common complaint, and they only had a small customer services team, the most common complaint was, my Meerkat hasn't arrived yet. We're like, we're not even the ones that do Meerkats.
Right.
Because the people couldn't tell the difference. People would ring up Admiral on the phones, and we go, oh, where did you hear about us? And they go, I think it was Go Compare the Money, Go Compare the Meerkat. And you're like, they just merge them all into one, because everyone's kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And they're the better at branding than most.
Right, sure. So how important is video production in marketing efforts, in particular with building trust and connecting with an audience?
Well, video production, stuff like this, thought leadership, particularly B2B financial services, which I've talked a lot about B2C examples. B2B, people is more emotional than anything else.
Sure.
People think it's quite cold, but actually, so thought leadership is huge on LinkedIn now. Video production, people buy from people.
Yeah.
So if you can get the CEO sat down having a conversation about stuff, and I've seen a company, a large asset management firm up north, do it really well, where the CEO, he's obviously very successful, very clever man, but he's just a normal bloke at the end of the day.
Sure.
And that's who you are investing your millions with.
Yeah.
So is this guy look okay? Does this guy look legit? That speaks volumes emotionally. Video production, but doing that in a way that is of a good standard also
Sure.
reinforces you've got the emotional bit. Oh, there's a person that I kind of trust. I like the look of
Yeah.
him. I like what he's saying. But then you've got this clinical bit at the back of your brain going, okay, but it's produced well.
Yeah.
And they're not doing this at the back of a shed.
Yeah.
And so the two things work together. You've got
Yeah.
that human bit, but also you've got the technical aspect of around it.
Sure.
I was working with a brand the other day, and they were like, and it's like quite a heritage brand, okay? It's supposed to be
Sure.
quite high-end sort of brand. And they produced a video which is genuinely funny, and it showed, and I can't give too much away who it was, but they showed the process of how their product was made.
Right.
And it was a genuinely funny video. But they were like, oh, but we like that, and actually that gives us a bit. I said, I like it, but you filmed it so badly
Right.
that it looks really cheap and nasty. And actually, if you want to have a bit of a dichotomy, do we're a company in the valley's building this
Yeah.
thing that's actually really high quality, but film it well,
Yeah.
So then you've got that sort of conflict then, not conflict,
Sure.
but dichotomy of okay, we're normal people, but we're also, look, we've got some money, we produce things really good quality,
Yeah.
almost reinforcing what they are.
Yeah, sure.
And there's no medium that's more emotive than video. It's obviously the
Yeah.
most effective, and it's not just me saying that. Everyone
Sure.
knows that, and it's common sense anyway.
Sure.
Video is always going to be more effective than words that are on page. It's going to be within financial services incredibly important for understanding.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's extremely important, and I think the only thing that stops people doing more of it is they don't know where to start.
Sure. That makes sense. So can you think of some key video campaigns that you've done with your experience? Ones that really hit home with a certain target audience, maybe? Got people talking?
So we're doing more now with thought leadership stuff, and I couldn't give exact examples because they're still kind of in.
No, sure.
But the thought leadership stuff comes in quite a lot. The other aspect of it is explaining videos, really big. So either to camera people or animated, but or just the combination of the two. But video campaigns for internal comms have become really big as well.
Okay.
So big companies, when you get your SGMs, your staff general meetings, more and more, and of course COVID started it, but more and more those things are being rehearsed with some additional assets overlaid on top to produce quite professional videos.
Sure.
And they're quite important because some of these things are big on stage affairs, but they also need a takeaway for people because a lot more people are remote these days.
Yeah.
Whereas it used to be, you only saw this stuff if you went up and sat in the CIA, or not CIA, how old am I? Sat in some local arena and watched it. At least now they produce top quality content because marketing is internal as well.
Yeah, for sure. So how important is data in marketing in general?
I mean, it's almost become a bit trite to say that data's important. I think everyone uses data, obviously, or people use it less than you think. Right. But data's important, but it's just got to be used responsibly.
Sure.
And there's been a huge uprising in, like I said, I rode this wave of digital, and everyone was obsessed with digital because you could measure everything, and that was great. But what that caused was almost a crushing down of creativity, crushing down of brand awareness and upper funnel work. So you can get a little bit too drunk on data, and you measure everything, and then you don't know what's useful.
Sure.
So obviously it's critical, but there's the two sides of it. There's the measurement and measure the right things and measure things right. And then, but there's also the appropriate use of data. And we've seen many times over the last few years how the big social companies have misused data. And then the marketers have almost inadvertently used it poorly as well. So it seems like a good time with changes of cookies and everything like that to kind of have a blank slate of going, what are you actually trying to measure here? What do we need to know? And then go with that. So data's critical, but it's got to be used responsibly, both for customers but also within businesses.
So what are some practical tips for using data?
So people sometimes go data first. So they use a tool and they go, oh, look, we can find out all of these things. Let's shoehorn use cases for the data. And it's good to know what you can find out because you go, actually, if we knew that, we could do this. I think work out what you're trying to achieve first. Take it right back to, okay, what are we trying to achieve? What is our brand objective? Okay, the brand is to make people feel this or do this. or we want to appeal to this many people.
Yeah.
And you go, well, that sounds wonderful, but if you're trying to appeal to everyone who's a tourist, can you accurately measure that?
Sure.
No. Okay, so that data's no use to you there.
Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, you could, it's 1 in 12, right? But you need to be able to use your data. Kind of comes in to see if you can use it to measure the thing that you were trying to bring.
Right.
A brand is there to bring about change, usually, of someone's opinion of a thing.
Yeah.
So can you measure that change in time through understanding the share of search, understanding the downloads and the views of the video,
Yeah.
you know, real, but moving it from vanity metrics, what do they do afterwards?
Sure.
Can you draw lines between the dots? That's what data's for. It doesn't become the master, it's the servant.
Yeah.
And people dead anyway for a long time get it the other way around.